Hello again, and welcome to Denton's Tales. Now, the names of many of the gods of Ásgarðr are obviously well known. Odin, Thor, Freya, Tyr, Frigg, and so on. But often that is really all that most people know. They've heard the name, but they know little or nothing about the particular individual the name represents. And even some people quite well acquainted with Old Norse mythology and religion are not always as accurate in their perceptions as they might think. The Old Norse pantheon was not quite the same as that of other ancient religions, insofar as the duties and responsibilities of the divine of Ásgarðr to the non-divine, the human population, which in the case of the Norse pantheon are those who dwelled in Midgard, the realm of mortals. Now, Ásgarðr, the enclosure of the gods, which comes from the words Os meaning gods and Garðr meaning an enclosure, was the home of the gods, not Valhalla, as is usually stated, even sometimes by those who should know better. You see it in documentaries, in books, and so on. For one thing, Valhalla as such doesn't exist. No, in Old Norse it was Valhall, which means the hall of the warriors slain in battle. And it was just that, a hall, nothing more. One of many such buildings in Ásgarðr. Now, a very important building to be sure. Oh yes, where the dead warriors, the Einherja, feasted with the gods as they waited for the great battle that would end the world. Ragnarok. But just a building nonetheless, and not the home of the gods. The gods lived in Ásgarðr. But, as I said at the start, those gods were not quite like many other gods in ancient religions, nor in those religions still popular today. Their duties and responsibilities not as clear-cut and rigidly defined as might be supposed, and certainly not quite as they are often imagined in the popular mind, nor described in countless books and documentaries. In many ancient religions, the gods created and actively controlled many aspects of everyday life. They decided things like death and what the weather would be, if it was going to be summer or winter. They cured people's illnesses. They put curses on them. They chucked thunderbolts at things, sent plagues of locusts, boils, frogs, and other nasty things if you happened to upset them. And if you didn't, they answered prayers for assistance, and so on. In Greece, for example, the seasons were directly controlled by the gods. Summer could not happen without them. Demeter, goddess of the harvest and agriculture, along with her daughter Persephone, the embodiment of spring, together they were the summer. They created it, they controlled it. Without them, well, it simply couldn't happen. So, when Hades abducted Persephone and took her to the underworld, winter descended upon the earth. Nothing grew, there was snow, and Zeus had to agree to an arrangement that more or less satisfied everybody. Persephone residing in the underworld with Hades for half the year, which caused winter on earth, and returning to the world for the other half of the year, uniting with her mother Demeter, and summer bloomed once again. The flowers grew, little bunny rabbits hopped around, and everything was lovely. A direct, hands-on control of things on earth by the gods. In other ancient faiths, the gods, well, they sent rain or storms, they granted good harvests, or they sent blights to wither the crops, depending on their humor at the time. And they answered the prayers of the faithful on occasions, even lending considerable hand in wars and conquest. The God of the Bible was particularly good in that department, but the Old Norse gods were not. See, they didn't answer prayers or control the weather in the way the gods of Greece or the Bible did. Their attitude was rather, get off your ass and do it yourself and stop bothering us. You know, the old saying, God helps those who help themselves, well, that really comes to mind. And the gods of Ásgarðr very much fell into that category. Now, as to the roles of the gods, sort of who did what sort of thing, it isn't true that the Old Norse gods had specific responsibilities for anything in particular, that they were in charge of or controlling things in the way Persephone and Demeter were, that this or that thing could only happen if they made it, if they controlled it, if they directed it, if they took charge of it. The Norse gods had associations with things, not hands-on direct control of them. They were not gods of something. And that, I think, is quite an important distinction. Freya. Freya, for example, is known as the goddess of love, but she had absolutely no responsibility for love whatsoever. It was not her job description, you might say. She was merely associated with love and everything connected with it, everything romantic, physical love, pregnancy, childbirth, anything connected with the act of love. Though, to be honest, while she is, of course, very much associated with the love aspect, perhaps sexual pleasure, the joy of intimate physical contact for itself, rather than being in love as such, might be a better way of putting it, since her own associations are of intimate relationships that didn't involve her actually falling in love with anyone. They were more interludes of physical pleasure, the enjoyment of intimacy with another person, one night stands, we might call them. She was actually rather like the hippies of the summer of love, in fact, where sexual intimacy was simply an expression of pleasure for the moment. It did not involve everybody falling in love with one another. Now, she is said by Odin to be very fond of listening to love songs or poems. Indeed, she is actually the patron of love songs, to lend an especially favourable ear to men who may call upon her. Understandable, of course. And it's good to invoke her in love affairs, but she had nothing to do with those love affairs as such. She was not responsible for love. She did not cause it. She did not maintain it. Unlike Persephone, popping off down to Hades, Freya could go and visit Hell in her realm of Niflheim for a few months without having the slightest effect on people falling in love, having sex, or doing anything else. Her own physical pleasure, her enjoyment of love poems, her liking for and assistance to those in love gave her an association with love that can see her as, well, goddess of love, I suppose, but she has no actual responsibility for it. As I said, unlike Persephone, she could sit with Hel in her high hall in Niflheim, drinking mead and playing board games for 6 months without any lack of love or sex, any reduced fertility among women back in Midgard. There'd be just as many babies conceived while she was away as there would be if she had stayed in Ásgarðr. Skadi. Now, Skadi is another good example. She is nearly always called the Norse goddess of winter, despite the fact that she had absolutely nothing to do with winter as such. She wasn't the cause of it. She had no control over it. It would snow without any directions from her, nor could she have stopped it snowing, even had she wanted to. She loved to ski and hunt in the snow-covered mountains of Jotunheim. She delighted in the bracing cold of her mountain home, the snow, the ice. Oh, she loved that, and she thus became a symbol for it. She represented the winter. She was associated with it, but she herself was not winter. She had nothing whatever to do with it as a season of the year, as the aforementioned Demeter and Persephone had with the seasons. Thor was not the god of thunder, though he is always referred to as such. Thor, the Norse god of thunder. No, he was a protector. He could use his great hammer, Mjolnir, to defend or to punish, but he had nothing to do with lightning and thunder. It wasn't his job to cause it. Now, it might happen if he banged his hammer, Mjolnir, down on something, but even in that case, he wasn't simply trying or even desiring to make thunder. That's not what he was trying to do. He was trying to hit something with his hammer. That was all. Again, it is an association. Loki. Now, Loki is not the god of fire. He couldn't have started a fire in his own hearth without tinder, sticks, and a striker to get a spark. And the idea of him as a fire god seems to have originated in 1835, when Jakob Ludwig Karl Grimm, the elder brother of Wilhelm Grimm, the pair famous, of course, as the Brothers Grimm, suggested it in his book entitled German Mythology, which traced the history of Teutonic mythology and folklore from the earliest times. And then, of course, the idea got a tremendous boost from Richard Wagner's operas, where in the last act of Die Walküre, Odin, or Wotan as he is in German, calls on Loge, as his German name is, saying, "As I found thee of old, a wandering flame," and he commands him to surround the sleeping Brunhilde with magic fire. The god of fire idea may also, of course, have come from the word Logi, which means fire, but it has nothing whatsoever to do with Loki. He was a trickster, not a pyromaniac. Now, perhaps Idun might have some claim to be seen as a goddess of youth, since it was her magic apples that kept the gods young, but that ability only applied to the gods themselves. She had no power outside Ásgarðr. She didn't spread youth across the human population of Midgard, tossing lovely apples far and wide for all to enjoy. So her status as goddess of youth is hardly deserved. At best, she was, I suppose, a divine fruit merchant to the gods themselves, you might say. Tyr is sometimes seen as a god of war, but he didn't really have anything to do with war as such. Getting his hand chewed off by a wolf really didn't count. And in fact, the only Norse god who did, since he had actually caused conflicts and wars, and would send his Valkyrie out to decide who should die and who should live, was Odin. You know, if any Norse god might be seen as a war god, it would really have to be Odin, I suppose. Now, Hel. Hel is quite an interesting one. Hel was not the goddess of death. No, she ruled the realm of the dead, which bore the same name as herself, Hel. She was a custodian of those who had died. That was all she was, a custodian. She was the goddess of the dead, not goddess of death. There's a considerable difference when you think about it. She didn't cause death. She never killed anyone herself. She simply took those who were already dead. Nor did she choose the time or the manner of their death. She had no say in that. She had nothing whatsoever to do with death as a concept. Of course, she was also not physically deformed. Half normal woman and half rotting corpse. She didn't go around dripping bits of putrid flesh and maggots, nor did she punish those under her care. The realm of hell was, well, it was pretty much an extension of life, people doing what they'd done in life, only doing it once they were dead. The Norse gods did not interfere directly in the affairs of humans, as did the gods of some other religions. They did not, for example, send plagues of locusts and boils and other nasty things down upon an entire country, nor did they throw thunderbolts or make storms if someone had irritated them a bit. Now, yes, they could perhaps give a helping hand to next year's harvest, as Thor was thought to do if he was pleased with the Yule goat offerings at the Midwinter Festival. Warriors might call on the name of Odin before battle, though, yeah, I don't know, since Odin was more concerned about getting the best warriors killed, so he could add them to his army of the dead in Valhall waiting for Ragnarok, he was perhaps really, not going to give much of a helping hand to the good warriors, since they were the ones he wanted dead. That's quite an interesting thought. But overall, the Norse people did not have the pray to God for help in all matters, no matter how trivial, attitude. And while they could interfere in human affairs if they chose to do so, as a rule, the gods of Ásgarðr didn't. Nor were they as jealous and easily offended as were, well, say, the gods of Greece, or even the god of the Bible, where if you didn't make a good enough sacrifice to them, the lamb you slaughtered was a bit puny, or you couldn't find a goat and you used a skinny chicken instead, or you make a better sacrifice to another god. Oh dear, the likes of Apollo, Zeus, or Athena might have a monumental hissy fit and do something very unpleasant to you, even to your entire country if they were really pissed off at you. So, with that, we leave the gods of Ásgarðr and return to the mortal realm. Until next time, I shall say farewell. Goodbye for now.